I struggled a bit to put this video together. It's not exactly a build guide, but rather going to be offshoots of different builds that I've explored, but using crossbows and plasma blast. The one that is a little bit interesting is the Infernalist, but we'll get into that in a little bit. But yeah, I feel like this is likely the more efficient of the bunch. It's basically the Herald of Blood, Herald of Plague Titan, except I'm using crossbows, right? And that gives me access to Plasma Blast for single target. Now, as you'll notice, Wind Dancer, sure, you can use it, you get your chains going off, but the AoE is kind of tiny, so while you can do that, I've ended up using two different crossbow shots instead, so that I get more safety from firing from afar. Let me just juggle my gems correctly. Okay, so yeah, you can either use, I don't know, frag rounds or explosive shot. I like explosive shot due to its AoE, but even then I'm still using frag rounds for single target. So if that's the case, then you could just use frag rounds by itself, technically. It just takes a little bit longer to get the chains going, so, you know, and like since you have to walk up close for full bleed damage to go through, it's better suited for single target, I find. And I don't know, like, that's why I'd rather just use explosive shot instead, and then once everything is cleared, if the rare is still alive, then I can swap into frag rounds and just shotgun from nearby, which is the purpose of the skill in this build anyways. And like, that's all fine, but you also have Plague Nova, which, to be honest, kind of trivializes a little bit the whole bit about having different skill gems for different purposes. As long as you have a large enough pack, then you can just use Plague Nova by itself. Do I have the wrong one selected? Or did I forget to... Oh, right. It's probably... yeah. There we go. That's another downside of using Wind Dancer. You end up requiring more spirit in order to fit everything in. And honestly, I think Plague Nova is just way too good for this kind of setup. I don't really like rituals, but I'll take the tablet. Let's try to zip into the bosses, since the main interesting bit about these characters is using crossbows for bosses. Yeah, like here, for instance, you'd rather just frag rounds the rare. And like if you're at that point, then you can just use Plague Nova for large packs. It'll charge itself back up. And then you can use frag rounds for stray rares. I think that's the rare, or I mean the boss, right? Let's just clear these two rares real quick. But yeah, like as you can tell, the whole Titan game plan is just way better. Even more if you couple it with maces. Because the big thing about crossbows is that even though, as you'll see, Plasma Blast is really good for disappearing unique mobs, crossbows have a pretty large damage bracket. So then you also have to kind of get a little bit lucky with high rolling your Plasma Blast. And there you go. Simple as that. I'll go ahead and clear the rest of the map after going through this character. But yeah, like the whole thing is, unlike maces, the other two-handed weapon alternative, crossbows have a pretty wide damage bracket. Like the lower bound is 179, the higher bound is 513. So it's a little bit awkward to try to scale crossbows for like one singular large hit. which is kind of strange because Plasma Blast has a ridiculously high attack damage multiplier. So yeah, let's see. That's the crossbow. Rest of my gear is the standard life resistance, flat physical. Since you're playing a blood mage, which allows for elemental damage to also contribute to bleeds, then you can get flat elemental damage, and that'll be perfectly fine as well. The gems, I don't know, it's nothing too crazy, pretty standard. You've got the Plasma Blast setup, which is the more important bit. As I mentioned, ridiculously high attack damage multiplier, but you're kind of begging on the high roll. I don't know if I high rolled on that unique mob there. It probably would have killed it regardless, but if you're facing a much tankier mob, then you'd probably want to get the high roll. Then the usual ambrosia. It's nice that you can use concoct as well, because then you've got like both of your flasks contributing to one-shotting with a high roll. Primal armaments, and then lightning infusion. And then you couple that with emergency reload so that you get more damage on the buffed attack. And then that should hopefully suffice for Plasma Blast to just evaporate the unique. Then you got your usual Herald of Blood setup. Herald of Plague, not necessary. If you want to use Wind Waker, maybe just do that. Plague Bearer, I would advise for. It's just really strong. And then if you do want to use Wind Dancer, I guess you could also toggle off Plague Bearer instead and just roll like that, right? It's up to you. I don't know. But if you do want to use Wind Dancer, then you would just have to get Ink AoE plus Reach, Deep Cuts, and then Brutality. Since you're going Blood Mage and your elemental damage contributes again, you can just use Fire Infusion instead as well. Maybe you get lucky and you get an Ignite. I don't know. But yeah, if you're not using Wind Dancer, then you gotta use Explosive Shot for clear. Use Mag Effect so it's large. You can use Elemental Focus since you don't care about Ignites. And then Fire Infusion because it's a fire skill. And Deep Cuts. Then Frag Rounds. The thing about Frag Rounds is that it shoots 10 projectiles. And each one of them are only hitting for 56%. But if all of them hit the same target, they combine into a singular hit. So 10 fragments would make this a 560 attack damage multiplier, which is why getting up close to monsters like stray rares is going to be nice. And coupled with that, you got close combat. In this case, it's purely physical, so brutality, heft, and then deliberation. Overall, though, like, I feel like you're creating problems by using crossbows, and then you're trying to stabilize the wide damage bracket that they have, which the bleed and poison explosions do perfectly fine. But at that point, like, you'd rather just use a two-handed mace. Like, the big upside is obviously the Plasma Blast, which is what I'm going over in this video. But, yeah. I don't know, like, the inherent increased AoE that you get as a Titan makes it safer as well, because you're just blasting screens far, far away from yourself. And then this tree, like, it doesn't have anything very noteworthy to go for it. It's mostly the same as the Herald of Blood and Herald of Poison Titan that I showed here, except that you have to start as a Blood Mage, so then you have to make this, like, terrible pilgrimage all the way over here, which mostly contributes to nothing until you get here. So leveling up as this build is not a good time. Another point is that since you're not a Titan, then capping your chance to bleed and chance to poison is a bit more painful. Chance to bleed isn't, or I mean, chance to poison isn't as bad since you're still getting the increases here, and you're just relying on the chance to poison gem to carry you all the way up there. But chance to bleed is a little bit rougher. You could always use the lacerate support as training wheels if you may. But what I was getting at is that since you're not a Titan, you'll have to invest a whole lot more into chance to inflict bleeding nodes. Not only that, but you're also going to have to get jewels with chance to inflict bleeding on hit. You either need 2 jewels with a high roll or 3 jewels with a medium roll, and then that'll get you capped on your chance to bleed. And yeah, I mean, as far as the ascendancy tree goes, you need this one node. I'm not sure what you would do with your other 2 points. You could go down this way, I suppose, because you're not going crits. And like, this one's really good. But you don't have much intelligence, so I don't know if you'd get much out of this node. This one should be fine, though. And yeah, I think that'll be it for this one. I'll hop on to the next character real quick now. Alright, so the next crossbow lady would be the Amazon. And for this one, I'm using the same combo of armor explosion off corrosion, and then proliferating those armor explosions with Herald of Plague. It works quite nicely because you get to scale your singular explosion trigger off of crits, and then if you get lucky and you high roll, then yeah, you're dealing substantially more damage per explosion. You also get to use frag rounds as your initiator, so you can just shoot from afar, and that'll get the job done. But Titan is scaling Wind Dancer so much that that attack already kind of feels like a ranged attack in itself. It's still pretty safe, right? Another noteworthy detail about scaling AoE with this kind of build is that since the explosions are larger, it does make it a good bit more stable, where you can clear packs because one explosion is not only hitting the monster that it is exploding, but it's also hitting its neighbor. So then all of those overlapping explosions will guarantee that the monsters are kind of killing each other, you could say. But yeah, this is what the crossbow variant feels like. One small nice detail that you get to play with on going crossbows is that you're exploding monsters off of breaking their armor with frag rounds. So then when it comes to rares, if they do survive the explosions from their pack, they'll be armor exploded. And those proximal tangibility mobs were a bit annoying. Okay, that's going to be a good example. Hold on. Let's just clear everything else. Oh, there's 2 rares. Fine. A little bit spooky, but should be okay. Okay, there we go. So that guy's armor broken. You can toggle into high velocity rounds, which gains bonus damage versus armor broken enemies. And even though that didn't hit for much, it might have been a low roll, it might have been non-crit maybe, but then you get to shoot frag rounds at it again in order to reset. See, like, that just like chunked him out for, I don't know, 60%, 70% of its life. But yeah, even if it doesn't kill them, they're reset where they're no longer armor broken, and then you can just break their armor again. So, the passive tree on this character is mostly generic attack damage, and then the crit stuff from Amazon, as well as accuracy, and maybe like a couple two-handed nodes. So that technically makes it where you could just use a mace, much like you did on the Titan. And then you could also just use Wind Dancer. For that kind of setup, you'd have to use Mace Strike for bleeds, much like you did on the Titan, and then Perfect Strike for ignites whenever you need it. But I don't know, like, it does work, but your Wind Dancer is so much smaller that I don't know if it's any better than just going Titan, dropping the crits, and then scaling the damage that way. feels a little bit unsafe, which is why I don't recommend it. And then, like, again, the main treat of this video is Plasma Blast. So if you compare Perfect Strike to Plasma Blast, the fact that you can preload your Plasma Blast from afar just makes it so much safer when it comes to one-shotting bosses than what Perfect Strike would be like. And on that note, there's a lot of things that you do, like they don't line up very nicely when you're trying to go one-shots with Plasma Blast. First thing that comes to mind is that if you're going for damage over time instead, then the fact that Plasma Blast is a lightning skill will also inflict a shock. And then the shock will make it so the damage over time is stronger. The other side is that it seems like the scaling on crit is not as high, so you can't quite one-shot them reliably. Gotta dodge the rock. Then you gotta dodge that as well. It's kind of another bit of the struggle of using Plasma Blast as your bossing tool. Like, if you don't one-shot them, then getting that second shot is a bit awkward. And I think it's fair for crit to not scale as much damage as damage over time, since it's like immediate damage. But yeah. You'd also not get the benefit of the shock from Plasma Blast off of going crits. So what else is there to say? As far as gear, as I mentioned, there's a wider damage variance on crossbows than there is on maces. This crossbow is a good bit weaker than the one that I had on my Blood Mage, which is on a different server. The rest of my gear is just generic Fizz, resistance, life, some accuracy and some crit chance wherever you can find it. But it's pretty standard. In terms of gems, it's also nothing too crazy. Got Mace Strike supported with Lacerate, Deep Cuts, Brutality, Close Combat, same as Titan. Got your Herald interactions. Since you're going Amazon, you drop Precision into one of your auras. Then whether it's Wind Dancer or Frag Rounds, you support it with Envenom, Corrosion, and Armor Explosion, which is the main mechanic. And then you go for Pinpoint, so that you can get stable 100% crit chance. Frag rounds, or I mean high velocity rounds, as I mentioned, the attack damage multiplier is much larger versus armor broken targets. You also want to drop Cold Infusion here, just off the odd chance that it'll freeze, because then that'll make it so your frag rounds will get more damage against frozen targets. But yeah, you also kind of run off of you run out of support gems to scale your crits, is another downside. And then like the Plasma Blast setup with the same supports, except you're using Ambush in order to try and one-shot. Perfect Strike is same setup as the Titan. Passive Tree is very close to the Shield Crit Amazon that I played previously. You just get generic attack damage, you get crit, you get some accuracy. You can scale weapon damage for Plasma Blast, which is what I'm trying to focus on this character. Some AoE, like a slight amount, but it's not that noticeable. And then I thought it would be worth mentioning these nodes, which are really good for one-shotting, since it's a hefty amount of crit bonus against full life targets. But this cluster I find kind of funny because you get like 10 crit, 10 crit, and then 80 if you haven't dealt a crit recently. Recently is the past 4 seconds. So when you compare that to, where is it? Did I? Where's my inevitable crits? Oh, there we go. When you compare it to this, it's 25 increased crit chance each second up to 100% once you hit 4 seconds. So it's kind of funny because like grabbing this cluster is kind of like putting inevitable crits on every single one of your gems. I don't know. I thought I should just mention that. But yeah, I mean, I think that's all there is to it. This ascendancy is not giving me much since I barely have any accuracy from the hybrid roll here. But yeah. Let me jump off to the next character, which is the more interesting of the bunch. Alright, so the last build that finalized this crossbow compendium, if you want to call it, is this Infernalist, which is kind of like the odder one of the bunch. More interesting one. I wouldn't necessarily say it's the strongest one. Might not be it. But something that's interesting about this one, I think, is the fact that it does scale attack speed, unlike the previous ones. And I think that's kind of what you have to do when you're playing crossbow builds. To offset the variance from the wide damage bracket, if you're just shooting multiple times, then it'll be good. Ah, that was nice. So it's got some nice interactions, as you've seen, for clear. And then for single target, you also get to use Plasma Blast on bosses. Kind of ruined it there, but yeah. For rares, you get to use Shock Burst. I'm just not very good at reloading, and I think that's actually a topic I should touch on. I feel like with the previous two that I mentioned, I've been trying to scale one long shot, or one large shot. And the problem with that is that by dismissing your attack speed, you're also making it where your reload speed is also slowed. What this means is that attack speed scales both portions, and it just feels substantially smoother. Whereas with the other ones, you gotta wait for the reload, and if you're not just blasting everything with one shot, then waiting for that really long reload, it's not only dangerous, but it just also feels kind of bad. But yeah, like, as long as I'm not messing up my reload timing on rare mobs, then I'll be more than fine. Just have to make sure to swap on time while the target is shocked, or shock burst to do its thing. And I do have emergency reload. Ah, didn't swap there. I do have an emergency reload on my right click for that matter, but I'm not very used to playing these builds that hit a whole bunch of times real quick. So it's more of a user error than anything really. That should be the rare. Yeah, I think that's a good moment to show this. So it does require a bit more setup, which is a little annoying, but yeah, you drop your orb, you put your wall, and then you load your Plasma Blast. And he's dead. Much like the bleed build, the shock is something that you profit from with the damage over time. And I guess like a side note, like this looks really strong when I showcase a boss that I do one shot, unlike the Amazon, which can also one shot. I just got a low roll there. But it's worth mentioning that bosses that have invulnerability phases leave you in this kind of awkward spot where you max out their damage for that phase, and then you gotta like awkwardly find a moment to shoot your Plasma Blast once again, once they're in their next phase. It's not as bad on this character since you're scaling your attack speed, but on the other two, it can be a bit weird, that's for sure. So yeah, let's see. The gear is, it's the same exact crossbow as the previous character, and the rest of the gear is physical or elemental attack damage, life, resistance, just the standard. This one is not a crit build, but it's also not Resolute Technique since you're actually getting Dexterity, which is required for Heralds. Plasma Blast is the same support setup, and the whole combo here with setting these up is Flame Wall will improve your damage. It's not very much because I've got a low level version, but if I had more intelligence, it might be more substantial. Solar Orb is more important, so you can probably get away with just not using Flame Wall, because Solar Orb you don't need any levels on. All you care about is the orb igniting a target, because then you can use Fire Exposure, which removes resistance from your target, which will make your ignite much better. And the big trick with this one is that you're supposed to only use this on skills that hit enemies, and Solar Orb does have this pulse that hits, but the ignite is immediate on any target within a certain range from it. So then you're profiting from this exposure immediately rather than waiting for the pulse. You can't really do the same with Flame Wall, unfortunately. And then the other two supports are just magnifying the exposure that you're applying. You got emergency reload as well to improve the damage, same supports. And then this is kind of like the interesting bit about clear and rares. So galvanic shards work as any of the other shotgun skills where they combine, but I think you'd rather just hit multiple targets so that you get multiple beams that chain through the enemies and convert fully into lightning. That's why I'm using the chain support, so that you get more hits and more beams. I believe most people tend to use Fork instead. I guess Fork doesn't have as much less damage, but I just like the fact that chain can chain targets. If I'm shooting up north, for instance, they can chain all the way around and hit targets down south. So it's got more coverage, and I feel more comfortable with that. I've got other supplement skills for clear, so that's why I go with chain. Martial tempo for faster attacks and faster reloading, lightning infusion, and conduction for more shocks. You want more shocks so that you can proc Herald of Thunder. Now the interesting thing is that since we're going Infernalist, we can ignite with lightning damage, which is how we're profiting from large ignites from Plasma Blast and then shocking them simultaneously. But yeah. So, Herald of Thunder can ignite, which we're scaling with Ignition. And then the other supports are Innervate, you get more damage, Lightning Mastery, Long Shot, more damage. So the gimmick is that by igniting with Herald of Thunder, you can proc Cast on Ignite, and then Cast on Ignite can trigger Voltaic Mark. Again, since you're an Infernalist, you can ignite with lightning damage. So then this triggered skill can proc Herald of Thunder, and you can kind of get a loop going on here, kind of like what the Invoker builds currently do with Herald of Thunder and Cast on Shock, triggering... Do they trigger Voltaic? Yeah, they trigger Voltaic, and then Voltaic triggers Herald of Ice. That's how they loop. But yeah, we're kind of doing the same thing, and then we just got energy generation on our supports. With enough damage, this can actually chain off-screen as it does, but yeah, getting that in SSF is a bit troublesome. And then the last bit is Shock Burst rounds, which I'm not super comfortable with using personally. It's good, it's just a matter that I'm not used to this kind of gameplay. But yeah, you get this projectile which deals petty damage at a high firing rate, but if it hits a shocked target, it emanates this pulse, which deals much more damage. So that's why you want to keep track of what targets or which rares specifically are being shocked, so that you can shock burst them down. And the supports in that, since you're scaling the pulse, you want Conk Effect, Ellie Focus, because this is already a payoff skill which does not apply ailments, and then Immolate, because if the target is shocked, odds are they will also be ignited. And then you gain extra as fire. So yeah, as far as the passive tree, as I mentioned, it's pretty interesting. Like you get to you gotta ignore the fact that you gotta pave out of the whole sorceress and witch starting area. But once you make it out here, like quite right away, you got some shock magnitude, you got extra chance to shock, gain extra as lightning, and then you get skill speed, which will apply to your attacks as well. You then get to scale up this route with elemental damage up to this branch, which will give you more attack speed and cast speed with lightning skills, both of which plasma, or all three of them actually, plasma blast, galvanic shards, and shock burst all are. So we've got quite nice attack speed there, and some like increased lightning damage, which is fine. Then this branch gives you a chance to shock, and then you get gain lightning as extra cold. This is important because even if you're dealing like a tiny sliver of cold damage, that's enough to chill a target. And by chilling the target, you then get 30% increased elemental damage, which is global. It'll apply to the lightning damage and subsequently to the ignites, which is what leads me to this point where you'll get increased elemental damage if you've ignited as well. Since you're already shocking, you could also get this node. I'm just short on points, but it's one of the next points that I was planning on getting. The reason this one is not as significant as the other two is because if you use it, like if you picture it solely on Plasma Blast, then by the time that you've launched the Plasma Blast, the target will already be applied with an ignite. So getting extra damage after that will not increase the ignite damage. You get increased damage against enemies hit with ailments, which works for your clear setup, but it also works against the boss because since you're tossing your solar orb out, the solar orb is igniting, so it'll count as a target with an ailment. That's the same reason why these two work. And as low as the pulse damage from a solar orb is, it will also chill. Then you get chance to ignite, some magnitude, you get elemental damage, some attack and cast speed with elemental skills. Again, all three of these are. You get some claws for flat damage. You also have this third one, which I would also get, but again, I'm short on points, and because this bottom branch has 3 lead-ups to the notable, whereas these ones only have 1 lead-up or 2 lead-ups, these are just more point efficient. Got some chance to ignite, some ignite magnitude, then you get some attack damage, and this cluster is pretty interesting, much like this one, where you get increased damage with hits against ignited enemies. So that'll work with Solar Orb again. Increased damage with hits against chilled enemies, which will also work with Solar Orb. Shock, it's kind of the same issue as this node here. You can still get it, it's still good, but it's not a priority. And even then, you got like this bottom branch, which has a nice amount of increased lightning damage. So there's a lot of scaling that you can go for further on. You also have this node here, where you get increased elemental damage if you've dealt a crit recently, which would be good for your clear since you're shooting galvanic shards so quickly. On the node of clear, there's also this cluster, which would give you, if you get all 3 points, a full 100% chance for 1 additional chain, and then your chain support gem will turn that into 2 additional chains. But yeah, like this is a really comfy character that I've enjoyed putting together. It's a bit wonky, but since you're scaling all of your attributes this much, it might not be the craziest thing to anoint Jack of all trades. And something that I do enjoy about this ascendancy is that you're only getting this node here, and then for defenses you can get Altered Flesh. I wanted to make a build that has a lot of like physical conversion and just mitigation through that route, and this is one that you could do. Interesting bit is that you can use Cloak of Flames, and then you'll get 40% taken as fire, which will go in hand with 20% taken as chaos. So as long as your resistances are good enough, you'll be mitigating a good chunk of physical damage. You could even top that off with a hollow mask, but I'm just not going that route because, again, I just tend to not use uniques, even if I have dropped them. And I guess another thing I should mention with this character is that one thing you can do is you can pull back from having as many damage nodes, and you can kind of focus on this area over here. And I don't find it off the table that you could just go evasion energy shield and just get like some energy scaling here, energy shield scaling there. There's a good chunk over here as well. Could maybe like venture off there. So yeah, this could be an energy shield build, and then you'd have access to these nodes. Probably just the energy shield one if I'm honest, but if you do choose to stay on a life base, then your next ascendancy points could just be these tiny ink life nodes, or you could maybe branch down for the infernal flame and then gain 50% as fire. As a final note, I wanted to mention that I did try playing a Warbringer with the whole armor explosion, Herald of Ice kind of setup with crossbows, and that works perfectly fine. It's just a matter of me not enjoying the single target there because you had to go through like totems and the whole Warbringer thing where totems spawn minions. I don't really like totems or minions. I will admit that totems do feel a lot better in PoE 2, just off of the base speed of the game being like slower than PoE 1. But yeah, there's that. You could also just use spears or maybe even quarter staves and you'll be more than fine for that setup. But yeah, and a tiny teaser, I might look into doing something with this. But if you go permafrost, or not permafrost, it can be basically any of your shotgun skills, and then you use frost wool. Put fork on the shotgun skill. You can kind of make this weird setup where it's a little bit clearer here. Drop the frost wool, you drop the flame wall right behind it, and then you pierce through the frost wall. Oh crap. So yeah, you fork through the frost wall, and then all the forking bolts will go through the flame wall, and they will all gain additional damage. So if the boss has a large enough hitbox, you can probably get a nice chunk of damage there. Like, the setup would be very precise, because you'd have to, like, precisely set both walls real near, and then fork through the wall, and then shotgun the boss. But that could lead into a lot of damage. I might investigate that later, I don't know. Just take that as a little Easter egg.